friends! If this is the first video you're seeing on my channel, hi! I'm Ginny D. I do cosplay and music and other various geeky things. And today I want to talk to you about a place called Evermore Park, which I just went to for the first time last weekend. If you look up Evermore Park on Google, you will see it described as a theme park. If you go to the Evermore Park website, you will see it described as an experience park, a world of play, step through the portal, become the hero, that kind of language. So needless to say, when my friends invited me to go with them this past weekend, I really didn't know what to expect. Was it going to be like a Renaissance festival? Was it going to be like a LARP? Was it going to be like Westworld without robots? I just didn't know. So in this video, my goal is just to tell you a little bit about my experience there and just help you understand what exactly Evermore is and whether or not you should go, and if you do go, how to get the most out of your experience. So first, let's talk about the basics of Evermore. It is located in Pleasant Grove, Utah, which is just about 40 minutes south of Salt Lake City. From Denver, where I live, it was a little over a 7-hour drive. Their hours are kind of wacky. They are only open Friday, Saturday, and Monday. The Monday hours are 6 to 10, and the Friday and Saturday hours are 6 to 11. We went on a Saturday, so we showed up right when it opened at 6, and we stayed all the way up until it closed. Adult ticket prices, depending on the date and the experience, range from $20 to $30, so pretty comparable to your local Renaissance festival, or at least comparable to mine. The experience that we got to play was called Mythos, which is their summer experience. It's sort of like a festival of magic and fairies kind of plotline. In the fall, they switch over to a darker, more horror-oriented plotline called Lore, and then in the winter, they do something called Aurora that's sort of like a Victorian, Dickensian feel. On the website, they encourage you to wear costumes, and since my fiance and I were going with other cosplayers, of course we took that seriously. Whenever you go somewhere in costume, there's always the risk that you'll be the only one that did that and you'll feel weird, but I would estimate that about 60% of the people there were in some form of costume. So we showed up about 15 minutes before the park opened, and there were already lines of people outside waiting to get in. While we were waiting in line, a man with a tiny horse came up to us and explained to us the basics of how the quest system works in Evermore. He told us that as first-timers, step 1 was to pick up our level 1 adventure card. When you first come to Evermore, you start out as a level 1 apprentice, and then as you complete quests throughout the season, you can level up through the 6 available levels. The first quest required us to meet with a member from each of the 4 guilds and learn of their attributes, watch a production by the roving acting troupe to learn of Evermore's history, and earn 1 piece of gold from an Evermore character. We were also given a map of Evermore, which, to be honest, we barely used because the park is basically a big circle, so it's very easy to navigate. Plus, the cast is super helpful and they are everywhere, so every time we had a question about something, there was someone to answer it. One weak point of this first quest is just that since most of the people coming into the park were there for the first time, a lot of people were crowding around specific characters, getting the information they needed to complete this first task. During the first hour-ish when we completed this first level, it definitely did feel like everywhere we went there were a dozen people already there doing exactly the same thing as us, which is a little unfortunate, but this first quest functions as sort of a tutorial to learn how to navigate Evermore and interact with the characters. Once we got past it, things got a lot more interesting and a lot more unique to our party. Also, I have to say that this watch a production by the roving acting troupe about Evermore's history task really sounded like it was going to be super boring, so we put it off until the end, but actually the Evermore History Act was just like a really funny improv sketch. And of course, the final task was to earn gold from an Evermore character. Pretty much every character you spoke to, if you asked them about it, would have a task that you could complete to earn 1 piece of gold from them, which are these little spray-painted rocks. At first I was like, wow, the gold could be cooler, and then I realized that there's really no way for them to collect the gold back, and even if they were doing that, people would probably steal it if it was like interesting coins, and these are easy to fit in your pocket. So for example, we asked this kind of shady merchant if there was anything we could do to earn gold from him, and he sent us with a coded message to go talk to one of the pirates. We talked to the pirates, we got information about a sort of a black market shipment that the merchant was receiving, we ferried that information back and he paid us. And not all of them are errands. The dwarves gave us each gold for telling them a joke. There are certain things you have to use gold for in Evermore Park, but to be honest, there aren't many. You can't buy concessions or merchandise with gold. You have to use real money for those. The gold is only used for plot-relevant things. For instance, when you decide to join a guild, you have to pay 5 gold into the guild for your membership. At one point, a character made a wager with us and we bet 4 gold on it. It's more of a plot point than anything else. Once we completed our first quest, we took it to the Kettle Cafe up front, got it all approved, and officially became level 2 mentors. It did cost us $2 to get the next set of 3 3 quest cards, and unfortunately they're not equipped to take cash, so that was a little inconvenient. But they're pretty neat little cards, so I understand why they don't want to just hand them out to everybody that goes in, especially when the cost of entry is pretty darn low. Each of these quest cards is worth 1 level. They don't need to be completed in any sort of order. In the remaining 4-ish hours we had in the park, we were able to complete all 3 of these quest cards, leaving us as level 4 paladins. When we went back to the Kettle Cafe, they let us know that they didn't actually have any more quest cards printed and available yet. This is just one of a few indicators that the park is still pretty new. It's under a year old and they're still finding their feet on some stuff. However, it didn't impact our enjoyment at all because there was so much more going on in the park than just the quests. In fact, by the time we'd completed these 3 quests, I think we were much more interested in engaging with the characters and trying to solve some of the story mysteries than we were in leveling up at all. Speaking of the characters, the actors who are employed by Evermore are 100% the highlight of the park. Having worked at a Renaissance festival, I'm very familiar with how mediocre, underpaid hobby actors perform in improv roles, and that was not what was happening here. Every single actor we met had an absolutely impeccable accent, and a huge variety of them. There were Irish people and Scottish people and British people, people with Cockney accents. None of them, I assume, real, considering this was Pleasant Grove, Utah. And all of the actors just completely inhabit their roles. At one point, we ran into this guy, Faldor, who was wearing this top hat that had these candles on top of it that were just melting down over the edges of the top hat, and he had these crazy piercing blue contacts, and talking to this guy was seriously unsettling. The vibe I got was like, stumbled into a fairy ring and came out 100 years later not quite the same. Our conversation with him laid the groundwork for this whole storyline of the Fairy King being sick with some sort of failed blood magic attempt thing. And I think it's important to point out that although a lot of what the characters were saying to us was clearly things that they were supposed to say to guide us down certain plot lines, none of the interactions felt scripted, and if you pushed the actors past the basic things that they were supposed to say to you, they didn't falter at all. They were completely ready to have a 30-minute conversation with you in character. There was a race for mayor of Evermore that was happening while we were there, which we could cast a vote for, and one of the people who was running was a guy named Suds who worked at the tavern. When we went to the tavern and talked to him about the mayoral race, we literally had a 25-minute conversation with him about mayoral policy. He was able to give us really specific information about what kind of mayor he would be and why, and it really didn't sound like he was pulling it out of his butt. There's also a merchant who was kind of like born again and had like decided that being a black market dealer was bad and that he should be a better person. He told us a little bit when we first met him about his change of heart, and then a few hours later when we came back by for something else, he was like sitting on a bench with a few guests having an in-depth conversation about morality. Like, they were just straight up discussing the trolley problem there in character. I think the coolest part about it is that you can take whatever you want to take away from this experience. Like, if you want to be a quest person and you just want to level up, you can dedicate all of your energies towards completing quests and leveling up through those main tiers. And if you exhaust that, like we kind of did in this first visit, you can join a guild and then you can level up within each guild. If you'd rather just have an experience, more like kind of a Ren Fair visit, you can throw axes and do archery. There's a reptile show that you can go see. And during Mythos, they have this thing called the Dwarf Games, where every hour there's sort of like a big carnival game that happens on the main lawn in the middle. And if you're more interested in the roleplay and the story, you can treat it almost more like an escape room experience where you're trying to track down the answer to a mystery. There were at least 3 ongoing plot lines that we touched on while we were there. There was the sick Fairy King, where no one knew what he was sick with or how it could be fixed. Someone named Violet had had her farm burned down a few weeks back, so there was a mystery over who had done that. And then of course there was the race for mayor, which included a lot of different characters where you could look into those characters and see if you thought they were good people or bad people and deserved to be mayor. And then on top of that, there were tiny little threads connecting every character to each other. Like the merchant that had a connection to the pirate that was smuggling goods for him. But there were also characters who were in love with each other and having us deliver little gifts to show their favor. There were rivalries between guilds and alliances between guilds. The more that we talked to the characters, the more I felt like there was sort of a bottomless pit of plot that we could explore if we chose to do so and if we had the time. Now, maybe we experienced most of everything. Maybe there wasn't much more depth than what we explored. But the fact that I feel like there could have been is testament to just the illusion of completeness that Evermore delivers. You very much feel like you are stepping into an ongoing story where you could never experience all of it. The further we got into the the night and the longer we were there, the more often it happened where we would overhear part of another attendee's conversation with a character, and we would just have no idea what they were talking about. Like they were trying to complete some quest we hadn't even heard of, or they were asking questions about a character we hadn't even met. We were pretty tired by the time the park closed because we'd been on our feet for 5 hours, but I definitely feel like if we had gone Friday and then also Saturday, we still wouldn't have run out of things to do. Of course, as a cosplayer, I would be remiss if I didn't compliment the costumes and even just the ambiance and decor of the place. When we showed up, we were a little confused because it's kind of in the middle of like office buildings and shopping centers and stuff, but the park itself is pretty big, and once you're inside it, there's definitely a sense of immersion, even though you can occasionally see building tops over the trees. All of the buildings in Evermore were specifically built for the park, and all of them are these beautiful stonework, thatched roof, historical, medieval looking buildings. The interior decor is amazing, just tons of detail. There's ambient music, which I read was written for Evermore, so it's a full original soundtrack. Once it gets dark, the park is lit in these really beautiful, very magical feeling ways. And then dotted all over the park are these gorgeous, intricate, massive statues, and they were custom sculpted for Evermore. There's a little graveyard that feels very solemn. There's like a pretty little bridge. There's water features. There is quite a bit of construction happening in the park still. Evermore has said that they have completed phase 1 of construction, but that there's more that needs to be done. And you can definitely see that when you're in the park. There are a few buildings you walk by where you're like, that is in process. But honestly, if you can just manage to look past 1 or 2 buildings that are still under construction, there's more than enough places to go and enough places to be. All that seeing the construction really did for me was just make me excited to come back when the construction was completed. I would estimate that maybe 15 to 20% of the park was under construction, and it's all marked on the map, so it's not like you're not gonna know what's in progress. And the park is big, so there's still plenty of places to go and things to do. All of the prosthetics and like the monster kind of props are all made in-house for Evermore too. So when you meet a goblin and they have like a crazy face and like a hooked nose and stuff, all those prosthetics are made specifically for Evermore. And if you go upstairs in this one building to where the historian sits next to a giant sleeping dragon, they made that dragon for this park. A few other things I want to note about the park: they do offer food and concessions. They were shockingly reasonably priced. At a place like that, I would expect to pay like $5 or $6 for a lemonade because that's just what you do when you have a captive audience. But I think their lemonade was like $2 or $3 there. We ate dinner before we came there, and to be honest, I think that would be a good idea because they did end up being sold out of quite a few things by the end of the night. I would rely on the concessions as snacks rather than as meals. They do have a full menu and price list on their website, so you can certainly prepare before you go there. So should you go to Evermore? In my opinion, yes, absolutely. If you can make it out to Utah, you should definitely give it a try. It is so ridiculously affordable that unless travel is like very difficult or expensive for you, you have practically nothing to lose. Having been there, if I were to run Evermore, I would charge people $45 to get in the door, and as an attendee, I would pay that. Instead, we paid $22 a head, which is like only a few dollars more than a movie ticket. Overall, and take this with a grain of salt because I haven't done any LARP yet, but from what I have seen of LARP, which is live action roleplay, this is basically LARP light. It's designed to be immersive, and you can choose how much of yourself and how much of a character you bring to the experience. If you go, I would recommend that you attend both Friday and Saturday. I would recommend bringing a costume and being a character. For us, we just took on the names of our D&D characters and wore some sort of generic medieval-ish garb. I really feel like taking your entire D&D group there in costume as their characters would be like the ultimate experience. Evermore really blew me away because a lot of the things it's doing to the quality level of a place like Universal or Disney, but it obviously doesn't have that kind of money behind it. Instead, you can just tell that it's being created and staffed by people who just really care about what they're doing. I admit that I have my concerns about how sustainable this kind of park is. When we were there were maybe 300 people throughout the whole night, and they have a pretty big cast, like I'd estimate maybe 50 on the cast and crew. I don't want to be a pessimist, and I want to believe that places like Evermore can be successful and can survive, but I also recognize, having been there, that a lot of money and a lot of energy has to go into maintaining a park like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you should go to it, not just because you should experience it, but also because we should support things like this. This is a fraction of the cost of a trip to Disney World or a trip to Wizarding World of Harry Potter. And yeah, it's a different experience than parks like that. But they're doing something so cool and so unique and so interactive. I just would so much rather my money go into their pockets than into like the vast coffers of Disney. Hopefully this was informative. I will put links to more information about Evermore in the description. This isn't a sponsored video or anything. They didn't like pay me to come out and check out the park or anything. I just went and I had a great time and I got a lot of questions about it on Twitter and I wanted to share it with you. So make sure to subscribe if you enjoy content like this. I am going to be doing my first LARP this fall. I am going to BEINSPORA, which is a wizard school LARP. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I've only seen it written. I will link to that in the description too in case you want to buy a ticket to that and come be a wizard school student with me. And I'll have videos about that up on my YouTube as it gets closer.
Ginny, are you ready?
Yes. Crown. Give me my way.
Oh, you got this.
Nope. Not my forte. I'm more of a bardic type.